Is it just? That's a whole different question. God said it this way. It's just. He says the scales are balanced here. He says, this is the way I want you to be. Now, think about it this way for a minute. If we go over to 1 Timothy 3, I believe it is, and Titus chapter 1, when we're talking about elders, are there different rules are they more stricter or less strict?
More strict, than for the believer.
Than for somebody that was not an elder. Yeah. There's a lot of the same things. But there's a few extra restrictions included in there. And it tells us why in some cases. But I guess what I'm trying to say is when God does something like this, there's a reason. We may not always understand it specifically, and we may not understand it the way God intended it, but he does have a reason. Yes, sir.
And I think part of that reason is that they are more directly the representative of God than the normal people of Israel. And then even then, the normal people of Israel have stricter laws than the other nations. And so the closer you are to God, the more you're expected to be like him and follow his commands and be holy and pure and everything. And so in a way, like, that's what he kind of, I think, hopes everyone would get to is kind of this kind of life that is stricter and wanting to be more holy and you be more like him. And actually that's where the Pharisees were born out of, even though that they kind of took it, I think, too far. But the Pharisees followed the Levitical command, the command for the priests, and they took it on themselves as normal people.
Now think of that concept with polluting. Does God pollute anybody? No, that's pretty easy. So the closer we are to God, the less we're going to pollute things. You know, as we do things we're not, it's like, okay, we're showing God in a bad light. It goes both ways here, kind of. And I think that's part of what is being taught. So when we look at this, when it says, in verse, got to find my verse numbers. Verse 1, when it says, defile himself for the dead among his people. I think King James says, makes himself unclean. Am I correct with that?
What verse?
Verse 1. 2. Verse 1. There shall none defile himself for the dead among his people.
In what chapter?
There shall none be defiled for the dead among his people.
That's the King James? Okay. Some say unclean. It's real easy sometimes to get our heads a little crossways. But in essence, what he's saying is, you know, if somebody dies, you don't even get to go to the house to mourn with the people. And we'll see a little bit strictness of this when we get to the high priest, which is just a little bit further down. But what he's saying is, you know, okay, you don't get to go to the areas that are polluted, that are unclean, because there's a dead person. You don't get to contaminate things. And in this same section, chapter 21 and 22, it talks about going and polluting or defiling the things of God, and it's speaking about the things in the temple again. So there's a bunch going on. Now, the interesting thing here is he goes and gives us an exception. And the exception seems to be born out of responsibility. Okay? The exceptions being, okay, you can defile yourself. And remember, defiling to them, they became unclean. It was almost impossible for them not to become ceremonially unclean simply by living. But there were some things they had choices in. So, okay, your father dies. Do you go and help prepare the body? That would make you unclean. Now, to a priest, that has a very specific causes an additional problem. If I'm not a priest, my father dies, I go help prepare the body and bury him, and that was supposed to happen. I cannot go to the temple for, I don't remember how many days, but then you have to be washed. There was a time period I could not go to the temple. I could not go worship God. There were things I couldn't do. I couldn't partake of a fellowship offering. Okay? So, what kind of special problems does that add if it's a priest?
He can't do his job.
He can't do his job. He can't offer the sacrifices.
Verse 2 isn't the exception to that?
No, verse 2 is the exception. That's why we're talking about the exception. I'm saying, okay, if this is the case, I'm trying to show what the exception is here. So verse 2 says, okay, for your father, your mother, your brother, your sister who's still in the family. If the sister has somebody else that can take care of them, in other words, if she's married, has a husband, he'll take care of it. Don't do that. But if you need to do something, if you have to do something, if it's your responsibility in this area, okay. Now we're going to see when we get to the high priest, he says no. Not even then. But here he's saying, okay, you can do these things. Now we get down to verse 4. He shall not defile himself. And this phrase here, some versions say husband, some versions say chief man. There's several different translations here. Being a chief man among his people, to profane himself. Okay, so let's understand the wording here. If he defiles himself, makes himself unclean, he profanes himself. So what is profane?
The opposite of holy.
That's the way we think of it. And that's not a bad way to think of it. The idea is we're making something much less. If we profane the name of God, we think of, okay, we're cursing him. Well, we're not putting him where he's supposed to be. We're making him less. And that's kind of the concept here. But I think we tend to think of it with the word profane as being really bad. And they're both really bad. So, whatever. So here, what does this concept of chief man be? Or husband?
NASB says as a relative by marriage.
Head of the house?
That's the concept, yeah. It's a hard translation, so they're not real sure. And what is it? Some versions, and I think they're from a different line of textual study, actually change it to suddenly. In other words, you're not supposed to unexpectedly go and do this for somebody else. And the concept, once again, comes back to, okay, why? Partially because of the job responsibility. But the idea is this is somebody of importance. This is somebody that has responsibility. Now, are we priests today? Do we have responsibilities? We are not supposed to put ourselves in a position where we cannot perform those responsibilities. That's not the exact same thing here, because we're not under the clean and unclean dispensation, but the principle still applies. Kathy and I were worshiping up in North Alabama one time. Yes, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And a man got up to, I think it was a Wednesday night invitation. And he was a process server. He took warrants to people. He would serve process. And he got up and he started off saying, sometimes I have to go to places that I shouldn't really be. And he was saying, and so, he was, explaining a little bit. He says, so I had to go over, and I've forgotten the name of it, to this strip club to serve a warrant. And he said, I drive up, and there's Daryl's truck. And I'm sitting here going, what? I wasn't there. Of course, Kathy says I don't have an innocent look. So anyway, so you can see everybody going, what, huh? And everything. And he laughed and he said, what happened to my truck? I had one of these old gray cheap Dodge pickup trucks, and a school bus had hit me in the back and bent my heavy-duty bumper down a little bit. Whew. He says, then I realized the bumper wasn't bent down, so it wasn't Daryl's. Of course, I'm sitting here already thinking that. Point being, we're not supposed to be places that are going to hurt our ability to do our responsibilities. Okay, so let's go on here. Talk about 5, which we've talked about briefly, which is they weren't supposed to mar themselves temporarily or permanently as a form of grief. And there's two thought processes as to why God said this. One is we know because they weren't supposed to do things like the people around them did. They're supposed to be different. They're supposed to be set apart. And 2, a lot of people want to say that God is saying, okay, I've made you. You don't want to make imperfections on your body. I'm not sure how much that scriptural that is. Thought-wise, it's good. And Kathy was talking to me yesterday, I think it was, there's a new trend out. People are actually going to doctors saying, I want you to snip some nerves or cut off my arm or do something to make them disabled. Yes, that was my thought. They think their concept is by being disabled, I get benefits. I get to be treated differently. Now, I think that's a mental disorder, but still, you're going to read more and more about that coming up. So, whether that is exactly what's going on here or not, I don't know. Okay, let's go on down to verse 6. And he's saying, okay, they, the priest, shall be holy unto their God. Separated, dedicated, they're his. They're there to serve him. They're there to represent him. Kind of like us. And not profane the name of their God. So if you take that and you see what's above it, he's saying, if you are profaning yourself and you're representing God, you're profaning the name of God. So deciding to be unclean, although it wasn't a sin to them, it sometimes was. Some things they could not help but to be unclean for. So just, it's a hard concept for us, but I think if we think about it from the standpoint of the concept is to be, as Zachary says, just as close to like God as we can be, that takes a lot of it out, a lot of the difficulties out. Okay, verse 7. They shall not take a woman that is a harlot nor profane. Some versions say defiled there. Neither shall they take a woman put away by her husband, for he is holy unto God. Thou shalt sanctify him therefore. Thou shalt Why? It doesn't say here. It will say a little bit later. But why were they not supposed to take? Well, let's leave that till later. Let's go on. We'll come back to this. The concept here is, once again, polluting themselves and the purity involved to be like God, to keep God's purity, to not bring God down, if not in our own view, in others' view. Verse 8, thou shalt sanctify him therefore. Thou, who's he talking to? The priest. Sanctify him. Who is he talking about with the him? No, the priest. Yeah. You shall set him apart. We miss that a lot. You shall sanctify him therefore. Why? Because he offereth the bread of thy God. Real quick question, does God need bread? What does it mean by the bread of thy God? Some versions say the food. What's he trying to get across? The offerings. He is taking your food offerings, the offerings of food. Now, whose were they to start with? God's. God gave them to him. He's taking your offerings and giving them to God. He cannot profane himself. You are to hold him up. You are to set him apart because he's doing this for you. That's the part there that is important. And then verse 9, which, unless you get the concept of this defile, profane thing, doesn't really fit in. But he says, but the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the harlot, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire. What was the punishment for being a harlot? Death. Generally how? Stoning. Fire here. Now, death is death, pain is pain. They both offer. Why fire here? Why is it so different? Kathy said fire purifies if you couldn't hear it. Her voice doesn't sound like mine. She's not as loud as me. So, but the point is not her. The point is she has profaned her father, who when he's profaned is profaning God. Our actions mean something. So that's kind of what's going on there. Okay, let's go to the next section. Talks about the high priest. Some versions say chief priest, some other, he's talking about the high priest here. Verse 10 through 15. And he that is the high priest among his brethren, upon whose head the anointing oil is poured, and that is consecrated to put on the garments, shall not let the hair of his head go loose, nor rend his clothes, neither shall he go into any dead body, nor defile himself for the father or for his mother, neither shall he go out of the sanctuary, nor profane the sanctuary of his God, for the crown of the anointing oil of God is upon him. I am Jehovah. Let's stop there for a minute. Remember Nadab and Abihu? Remember said, no, Aaron cannot mourn them. This is the direct command here. He wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral. He wasn't even allowed to leave the sanctuary because he's so close to God. Once again, this pollution concept, profanity. Verse 13, once again, this gives us a little, the stricterness of the marriage options. And this gives us a little reason why. And he shall take a wife in her virginity, a widow or one divorced, or a profane woman, a harlot. These shall he not take, but a virgin of his own people shall he take to wife. And he shall not profane his seed among his people, for I am Jehovah who sanctify him. What's the importance of his seed among the people? They're going to grow up to be priests. They are the heritage. The lineage is super important in Hebrew history. Why? Because it was prophesied through the Hebrew lineage, specifically the line of David, that Jesus would be born. The priests were to keep their bloodline pure, so that they could be close enough to serve God. Question, just to give you, obviously here the answer is no. But what would be the concept of a priest that married somebody from a different tribe? Would they be able to work as a priest? No. Would their descendants be able to? They would be half priests. That would be much like being half Christian. You can't do it. It doesn't work. So we see this strictness, this care. And you can't talk about this without thinking about, okay, how do we pollute our Christianity today? Are we required to marry somebody that is a Christian?
Not required, but it's suggested.
So the concept is, we can learn from this. One of the reasons why the children of Israel were told not to marry from the nations of the land they were going to come to was because they would bring in their evil worship. We have the same foibles, is that the way you pronounce that word? We have the same concepts, issues today. I think I've said this before, I read it just a couple of weeks ago. It's hard to conquer the demon you play with. If we associate consistently with people that do things, act in ways that we shouldn't, how much likelier is it that we will? And so from that standpoint, the principle is still there, I want to say. But we see how he's telling the high priest, okay, you are special. There are certain bounds that you have to stay within. Now, as priests today, we are special. There are certain bounds that we have to stay within. Not the same, I'm not talking about the same boundaries here, but there are certain boundaries that we have to stay within. So we need to keep that in mind and search those boundaries out so that we can be pleasing to God. Verse 16, and Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron, the high priest once again, saying, whosoever be of thy seed throughout the generations that has a blemish, let him not approach to offer the bread of God. Quick note on Hebrew here. Have you ever looked when it talks about offering a sacrifice to God at the Hebrew concept there? It means to draw near. In other words, they were not allowed to draw near to God without bringing a sacrifice. That was the same concept here. So when it says draw near to offer, it's a double emphasis here because it's almost exactly the same words here. Okay. Let him not approach to offer the bread of his God, for whosoever man that he be that hath a blemish, he shall not approach. A blind man or a lame, he that hath a flat nose, or anything superfluous, or a man that is broken-footed, or broken-handed, or crooked back, or a dwarf, or that have a blemish in his eye, or is scurvy, or scabbed, or hath stones broken. Okay, let's stop here for a minute. If you were reading in a modern-day version or a different version, some of those will be different. But the concept is plain. God is saying, people that are blemished, not always by their choice, are not allowed to come and make the offering. Oh, how would that apply to us, by the way? Does that mean if we have a flat nose, we can't come to worship God? No. But it's kind of hard to worship a God when your soul is blemished. How do we blemish our souls? Sin. So, just, kind of concept there that we need to. No man shall come of the seed of Aaron, the priest, that hath the blemish, shall come nigh to offer the offerings of Jehovah made by fire. He hath a blemish. He shall not come nigh to offer bread of his God. He shall eat the bread of his God, both of the holy and most holy and the holy. Only he shall not go into the veil, nor shall he come into the altar, because he hath a blemish. He that because he has the blemish, that he profane not my sanctuaries. For I am Jehovah who sanctifieth them. So Moses spake to Aaron, to his sons, and to all the children of Israel. Okay, so we have a priest that is born deformed, possibly breaks his leg later on. I don't know. But he's deformed. He cannot perform sacrifices. Is he thrown out of the camp? No. Because he is of the lineage of Aaron, he is allowed to eat the holy foods. Okay, remember, that's how they got their food. The priests got their food by the sacrifices. They received a portion of the sacrifices that were offered to God. Those were considered holy foods. These priests were allowed to eat that. We're going to see some more restrictions as we move on. We're not going to get as far as I thought we were. Questions before I move on that? Okay. Chapter 22. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and to his sons, that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, which they hallow unto me, that they profane not my holy name. I am Jehovah. Say unto them, Whosoever he be of your seed throughout your generations, that approacheth unto the holy things, which the children of Israel hallow unto Jehovah, having his uncleanness upon him, that soul shall be cut off from before me. I am Jehovah. He's simply saying, hey, children of Aaron, you don't come on purpose being in an unclean situation and offer sacrifices. You don't come and light the candles. You don't do these things when you're unclean. Because if you are cut off. That's what he's saying. Now, the concept here, if you read those words, different people, it says, talks about the things which the children of Israel have hallowed or sanctified unto Jehovah. Things that the children of Israel have given to God. That's what it's talking about. So, if nothing else, you could say, okay, I've sanctified this cow to God. I've hallowed this cow. It's his. We're going to offer it to God. Okay, priests cannot touch that if they're in an unclean situation. This section continues. What man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper or hath an issue, he shall not eat the holy things. Well, wait a minute. We've already covered lepers. Lepers were literally thrown outside the camp. The food that they had was eaten, many times required to be eaten in a holy place, so that would be within the sanctuary somewhere, within the walls. Why do you think this had to be mentioned again? Emphasis? Yeah, we do tend to think, oh, I'm special. That doesn't apply to me. So yes, emphasis. And the fact that it also reinforces the fact that if a Levite was leper, they fell under the same laws as everybody else. So we get that concept in here too. But there's an additional thought here, and that is the fact that he's saying, hey, he can't even eat of his food, that's the holy food, until he's clean. And it does mention that, but I don't think I read that far, but until he's clean. So he had to be fed elsewhere. Yeah, it would be real easy for us as humans to say, well, that's his food. He has to be able to eat it. We do that. We rationalize a lot of things. So he's made a point here. He's saying, no, this is the rule. It's got to be done some other way. A leper or hath an issue, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. And whoso touches anything that is unclean by the dead, or a man whose seed goeth out from him, or who toucheth any creeping thing, whereby he may be made unclean, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath, the soul that touches any such shall be unclean until the evening, and shall not eat of the holy things, unless he bathe with his flesh in water. And when the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterwards he shall eat of the holy things, because it is his bread. That which dieth of itself, or is torn of beast, he shall not eat to defile himself therewith. I am Jehovah. They shall therefore keep my charge, lest they bear sin for it, and die therein, if they profane it. I am Jehovah, who sanctifieth them. Verse 8, he that dieth of itself. Were the children of Israel in general, not the priests, able to eat of an animal that died by itself?
Yeah, but they were unclean till the sunset, like the next day.
Absolutely. So here we have another thing. They couldn't go out and specifically make themselves unclean, is what we're seeing here. If they had a choice, exceptions if you needed to bury your father, there were certain responsibility type exceptions that were applied, but by choice, you didn't get to go make yourself unclean. And I think that's important for us today to notice as well. Okay, we're not going to finish, but I'm going to introduce this next section, starting in verse 10. There shall no stranger eat of a holy thing. A sojourner of a priest or a hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing. Okay. Priest's family here. When a priest offers a sacrifice, let's say somebody offered a sacrifice and he got the shoulder, that fed his family. Who is his family? Who could eat that holy food? That's what this is talking about. So if I was allowed to eat this and was feeding my family, and I'd hired Josh to work for me, Josh couldn't eat it. Okay? They're making us a specific point here. He could not participate because he was not part of the lineage. Now, interestingly enough, if, well, let's go on, because it does give us some differences here. But if a priest buy any soul, the purchase of his money, he shall eat of it, and such are born in the house, they shall eat of his bread. And if a priest's daughter be married to a stranger, she shall not eat of the heave offering of the holy things. But if a priest's daughter be a widow or divorced and have no child, and be returned to her father's house, as in her youth, shall she eat of her father's bread. Okay, let's stop there. I think we can see, and I'm going to stop after this comment unless there's a question. I think we can see what he's saying is, okay, daughter, she leaves, marries somebody else, she can't eat this. But if she comes back, what's the difference? But she comes back under my roof because her husband died, she can eat of it. He's defining so that they didn't make wishful mistakes is the best way I can think of it. It's real easy for us to want to help people. It's easy for us to want to do certain things. But they need it. They're hungry. He's saying, no, certain things have rules. You don't participate in certain things if you're not allowed to. I'll stop there. Are there any questions? Layman. Layman is, okay, the difference between a layman and a priest. Priest was a priest. Layman was somebody else. Yeah. No, a layman is generally a word that is in contrast to ordained, if you want to put it that way. They were ordained to be priests by the fact that they were born in the priestly line. A layman would be somebody that may do the same things, but is not specifically that. In today's society, many denominations will say, I'm an ordained minister. Ordained means appointed, by the way. Okay? I'm an ordained minister. Well, I'm just a lay minister. The difference is the concept, in this case, of lineage. Yes. Where the authority is coming from, in a way.
Layman in your Bible, 'cause
It's translated stranger in some of the other versions.
okay, that's what I have, stranger.
Yeah, so it's somebody that is outside of the normal order there is the concept. Okay, thank you.